there were 76,617 short contracts to keep the price down. It's an all-time record. What you're witnessing right now is a desperate effort by the West, who has always been able to easily manipulate the price of gold and silver through levered contracts because no one ever challenged them by standing for delivery. And that's really the difference. And these deliveries continue to happen across the globe. So yeah, I think should be looked at as a very optimistic and hopeful development, where they have to expend conventional wisdom as that gold and silver drop due to easing of the Israeli-Iran tensions, the signing of the temporary or hopefully the long-lasting ceasefire. But that's not what it was. I mean, you had options expiration, you have the end of the quarter, which options expiration was today, mind you. And I think it's interesting that they really had a hard time keeping it at or near $36 an ounce. And if you look at the amount of contracts that they had trying to keep it below that level, it's really quite incredible. There were 76,617 short contracts to keep the price down. It's an all-time record. And here it is. It's right back up. The demand, the physical demand at that level is extraordinary. But to see gold down $100 since June 12th and silver $1 lower, that's not a reaction to geopolitical events or a cooling of the narrative. This isn't a natural correction. It's a managed decline, and it started Sunday night, and it went all the way down to today. But we have, not only do we have the end of quarter and the options expiration, you have the July contract, which will go off the board, I believe, on Monday, the first day of delivery requests. And so we've been seeing tremendous deliveries come out of COMEX. I would expect to see that continue. Look, the prices were reacting long before any conflict had arisen in the Middle East, certainly the one that we're focusing on. But since President Trump was elected, you've had almost 820 tons of gold stand for delivery done again, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 tons of silver stand for delivery. The trend is not stopping, quite frankly, and you can see the amount of effort that the banks are using to keep it down. I mean, it's extraordinary when you figure each one of these contracts on silver are 5,000 ounces, and they're trading 76,617 contracts short to keep the price down. That reeks of desperation, and it reeks of stupidity, if you ask me, because you have a good portion of the world who is using that effort, that manipulative effort, to stand for delivery and rewrite the narrative. You could say the same thing is happening with platinum at the same time. So how well gold and silver have held up through all of this is noteworthy, to say the least. So yeah, I'm actually quite surprised and quite optimistic that this correction is behind us, and that the amount of effort needed to hold it down is something that has to have the banks on their heels and very concerned.
Who has the greatest power to move the markets so fast?
Well, I mean, it is, on one hand, it is the central banks. It's what it is to me more than, I mean, that's a good question, but what it is, it's that the gold and silver disappearing from the exchanges, that's the physical liquidity upon which this entire house of cards is based. And if you're pulling the liquidity out because it's standing for delivery, that's a problem. What you see in many cases is what's called a short squeeze, where the traders do not have the ounces of gold that standing behind the contracts that they have. And so they have to rush to get it in order to cover. That represents a short squeeze. So it is the buying of the central banks. It is the buying of the sovereign wealth funds. It is the buying of the biggest money in the world, the sophisticated money in the world, who is able to accumulate and stand for delivery, that is affecting the price at that level. And yes, it is exacerbated by these moments of panic covering in an environment where we continue to see delivery requests. And that's something that I think people need to really understand, that this is something that never, ever happened before. David Jensen does an amazing job on Substack of explaining this. He talks about, look, the LBMA is trading 200 million ounces of gold per day, and 3.43 billion ounces of silver with a B per day. That's almost 4 times global mine supply per day, annual global mine supply per day, standing behind somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, under 200 million ounces. That is the float. I think it's much less than that right now. So you're talking 12 plus times the float. What you're witnessing right now is a desperate effort by the West, who has always been able to easily manipulate the price of gold and silver through levered contracts, because no one ever challenged them by standing for delivery. And that's really the difference. And these deliveries continue to happen across the globe. So yeah, I think should be looked at as a very optimistic and hopeful development, where they have to expend that kind of effort to hold the price down, and yet it really didn't go down very much, didn't dip below 36, and if it did for a very, very short period of time, and here we are right back above it again. I wouldn't want to be as stupid and irresponsible as these banks are, having that kind of a short position in an environment where much of the world is challenging it through delivery. So yeah, it's to his question, I think a lot of it is short covering, but it's short covering because these players, whether it be central banks or sovereign wealth funds, are standing for delivery. That's what's different. I don't know that you'll see it immediately. I think you're beginning to see it. I think you're beginning to see, maybe this is part of the reason we're seeing so much in the way of deliveries to back these naked contracts, to have the physical. I think it just will be much harder for banks to continue to play this game where they're using unallocated paper derivatives, which will dramatically affect the balance sheet. And so, yeah, I think this is an environment where we could expect to see much higher prices after the Basel III, maybe not immediately, but what it ought to do is make it much more difficult for these players to continue to suppress the price with unallocated paper, especially if they're standing for delivery, and especially if it starts to really negatively affect their balance sheet. This will become a game, I think, where that kind of position is considered foolhardy. So yes, ultimately in the long run, I think it's one of these deals where we can't expect it to happen just like that the moment the switch is flipped. But I think it is a trend that we are seeing where these banks already, it appears as though they're realizing this in gold. We haven't seen them capitulate in silver yet, but I think that's coming. And quite frankly, to have these unallocated naked positions against the backdrop of global demand and global offtake is as stupid as a mud wall in a rainstorm. And I think it will have a dramatic effect. Maybe not all at once, maybe not at first, but over time, absolutely it will rear its head over the next several weeks. But as I've mentioned to you before, to me, the biggest development is Sergei Lavrov coming out and saying that the Bridge network, their cross-border settlement payment system, which is mBridge, will be open to non-BRICS members. And that is something that has gotten no attention. To my knowledge, I'm the only one screaming about it, but it's massive. Because what you really have are many, many, many countries and alliances that are indirectly aligned with the BRICS nations.